Okay, this is my modern coffee table build, which I built out of a large hunk of walnut that I had laying around in the garage that I had used for another project. I really couldn't decide what I wanted to do with it, and then one day it just popped into my head. This is probably a good coffee table size, so that's what I did. But I wanted to approach it a little bit differently, and I wanted to cut steep beveled angles for the sides as opposed to just keeping a rectangular shape with rounded over edges. I wanted to make this just a little different and more unique. And I think I ended up pulling that off in the end, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. And then I'm cutting this thing with a Bigfoot saw because in order to get these large beveled steep angles, I needed a saw that would be able to do that. So this was up for the task. And essentially what I did is I found the center and then started just drawing the angles out as I thought they would look. And there was not an exact science to this. Basically what I did was just started making cuts, seeing how it looked, readjusting, and you can see I set a guide up and just kept on making one single cut, and then would just keep on looking, readjusting, and just kind of going by feel instead of an exact actual science to it. And I also was trying to be cognizant of not taking away too much and going on too crazy of angles because I wanted to preserve as much surface area as I could. And this thing measured, I think, about 43 inches by, I think, 30 something odd inches. So it was not a huge coffee table, but big enough. I think it worked out to be a good size. And I'm not sure if I mentioned in the beginning, but I believe this is about 2¼ inches thick. And so it's a rather sizable piece. And here I am kind of looking at the angles. I'm kind of going around this thing. You can see I drew some white chalk lines on top to give myself some sort of guide. And then as you can see, look at the grain in that thing. It is just absolutely a gorgeous piece of wood. And I believe the whole entire thing cost me about $800. So it was not a cheap piece of wood. But I feel like I got a couple of projects out of it. So in the end, it was well worth it. And here I am with the guide again, just kind of trying to find a good rhythm. And eventually I kind of got to the end of it, started sanding this baby down, and did the usual going to, I think I ended at about 120 grit, and just slow, tedious process as usual. As you know about the sanding, it gets quite boring and quite tedious. And several hours later, you finally finish and just try to get on to move to the next project. And as I was adding the final touches of sanding, I wanted to keep the definition lines, so I tried not to round over too much. I didn't want to keep those all the beveled angles too sharp, but I also wanted to keep the definition of them. So I was just kind of going over, doing the fine tuning here, and getting a slight roundness, but still keeping the defined edges. And then for the base, I ended up having a bunch of steel left over on a job site, and the stuff was 1/2 inch thick. It was actually some sort of backing plate that we had left over, and ended up going with that for the base. And you'll see coming up how heavy duty that stuff is, but it's unbelievably bulletproof. Yeah, and quite honestly, you end up saving a lot when you go with materials that you have laying around or you have from another project, because costs can get way out of hand, especially when you're doing this project is basically just for myself. We ended up using it in our living room, so it's kind of a project for fun and not to go and sell to somebody. Which one thing I do like about that too is you can just be as creative as you want and not worry about, pleasing a customer or somebody who's going to be trying to buy this from you. And as you can see, I was cutting around the holes that were existing there, and I was cutting chunks out. And this stuff is 1/2 inch thick. It's basically structural plate steel we ended up using for the base, and it is a massively overkill for a coffee table, but it ended up working out. Here I am cutting it with the metal saw, and I just basically sat there and played around with it and just came up with this triangular sort of base. And you'll see as I face them the opposite ways, and I'm going to pop a few holes in here. And here I am welding it up. I got a couple of chalk marks there, and I wanted to show you this because this is a fatal mistake I made, and I had to grind up the welds. And watch. On the right of your screen, you see the metal start pulling up in the air because as I was welding on the left side, the right side picked up in the air. And the reason that happened is because I did not clamp down my material. Now, I know way better than to do that, and I did it anyway. So just goes to show you, even as much experience as I have as with welding and not clamping things down, sometimes you forget. So I ended up having to grind those welds out, and you can see underneath I just pushed on. I was like, geez, I was a little upset with myself for not clamping the project down like I should have, but hey, it's a good lesson right there. And there I am putting the camera down so you can see it. And now, as you can see, I clamped them down, ground the welds, re-welded it, so now it's going to be a nice flat, even, square surface all the way around. And literally just went with a couple of 1-inch welds. And here I did a chamfer, or I cut a groove, and then I filled the weld in, and I've done that on a couple of my projects. And then I'm going to end up grinding that flat so it'll lay flat, but then there's still a channel that I ground in there, and it'll be filled with metal. So this way it can give a nice clean look and not show welds, even though you can see the welds that I made before. But when you're actually looking at this table, when it's all together, you won't be able to see any welds. And I do like that when you see metal together and it doesn't look too industrial. I mean, it's definitely got that vibe of industrial, but at least it won't be overkill with showing welds. Another thing that always comes up on my pieces is this stuff gets out of hand with a lot of weight. I believe each one of these bases, I weighed them, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but I thought it was 25 to 35 pounds per leg. So it's just something else you keep in mind, is to not make the pieces too heavy. But on the other hand, it's nice making something with some weight, and you can kind of tell this is not cheap garbage, because so much of the furniture nowadays, it's almost too light and too cheap. So it's tough to always get that kind of Goldilocks zone. And then I'm just sanding down everything right here, getting all the edges, kind of softening them a little bit. And I drilled a couple holes, or 3 holes in the top, and you'll see I'm going to put inserts in the wood. And here I am kind of sizing it up, putting everything on top, making sure it's even all the way around. And I'm about to mark for the inserts. And on the inserts, I went with, I didn't properly drill them, and you'll see right here, I ended up breaking them, probably because I did not do it the right way. It ended up working out. But as I was screwing them in, the thing started snapping on me, a couple of them. And I think I had the hole size wrong, to be honest with you. But I just took the grinder, cut them down, And then anything that was messed up, I just kind of went back through with a 3/8 inch tap. And again, just flat black. I do that on so many of my projects, mainly because it's just nice and easy to repair. I'm just waiting for them to dry up. And, typical Rubio monocoat on top. I think I went over it about twice just to give it that final good finish. And just look at that grain. I mean, to me, it is gorgeous. And the steep beveled angles really show up that grain. And just a couple of felt feet, which I know usually isn't the best thing, but it so far has worked out, and this thing's been done for over a year. And here's the final shots. I think it came out gorgeous, mainly because the wood is just so beautiful. It'd be so hard. You could put that piece of wood up on a couple of shoe boxes, and it would still look beautiful. So the wood screams beautiful, and a couple of nice shots. And I'm super happy with the way this thing turned out.